Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling something fascinating.
Oh,
So I have a creature, sure, but it's really about a global pattern, a clash between, well, short-term economic wins and potential long-term ecological trouble. We're talking about crayfish. And we're diving deep into a really significant piece of research here. It's a 2012 review paper, Global Introductions of Crayfishes, evaluating the impact of species invasions on ecosystem services. Quite a title. It was led by David M. Lodge, but had, 17 co-authors? It's a major synthesis.
that's right. And our goal today really is to unpack the core puzzle this paper presents. Why do we seem to keep making similar mistakes across the globe? We're looking at those really complex, often quite messy trade-offs that pop up when humans deliberately move species around.
Like for aquaculture or maybe the pet trade.
Exactly, those kinds of reasons. And we need to ask, what's the real price the local environment, and often the local economy too, ends up paying for that initial perceived benefit?
Okay, let's get right to that central tension then. What's the fundamental conflict that these researchers really zeroed in on?
Well, it pretty much boils down to something they call asymmetric incentives. So when a non-native species gets introduced, it's almost always done for a specific anticipated benefit. Usually it's about boosting what we call provisioning services.
Things like providing a new food source
Yeah,
or something people can sell.
precisely. Cheap food, a new product, profit. But the catch is, those short-term gains, they're often wiped out, sometimes many times over, by unexpected and usually much larger long-term losses in other vital ecosystem services.
Right, and the asymmetric part is key, isn't it? It's about who benefits versus
Yeah,
who bears the cost.
you've got it. The people or industries profiting from the introduction, say, an aquaculture business, they're often completely separate from the people suffering the consequences down the line.
Like the farmer whose crops get damaged or the town dealing with infrastructure problems.
Exactly. The rice farmer losing yield, the local council spending a fortune fixing eroded riverbanks or clogged pipes. The people who benefit rarely fit the bill for the environmental damage or the economic fallout. And that makes effective regulation, frankly, incredibly difficult.
That framing is really crucial. Okay, so to grasp the scale of this, we probably need a bit of context on the natural history that humans are now, scrambling.
Yeah, it's a story that goes way back, deep time, really. So the world has about 644 known crayfish species. Naturally, they fall into two major groups, the Astacoidea and the Peristicoidea.
And that split goes back millions of years.
It does. It reflects the breakup of the supercontinent Pangaea maybe 185 million years ago. Astacoids, they're the northern hemisphere group, think ancient Laurasia. Peristicoids are southern hemisphere Gondwana. They evolved in total isolation for geological ages.
And now, here we come. Humans with global trade basically dismantling millions of years of that separation. In just, a few decades? That's this anthropogenic homogenization idea, right?
That's exactly it. We're mixing lineages that have never coexisted. The paper makes it clear, because of human introductions, crayfish are now established in places they were historically completely absent. Think continental Africa, large swaths of the Oriental realm.
Wow, so we're kind of standardizing the world's crayfish.
In a way, yes. We're making the aquatic decapod fauna, the crabs, shrimp, crayfish, look more and more similar across the globe, erasing that unique regional biodiversity.
And the main driver behind this massive reshuffling, it's mostly about food, isn't it? Human consumption.
Overwhelmingly, the paper points to this huge surge in global crayfish production over the last 60 years or so. And the really striking figure is that non-native species now make up the vast majority of that production worldwide.
How much?
Something like 91% if you include the massive output from China. So the demand for crayfish as food is fundamentally reshaping their global distribution.
Okay, so motive established, evidence of spread is clear. But the core of this review, as you said, is about quantifying the damage. Where did the researchers focus?
Right. They drew heavily on the best documented cases, which tend to be the North American species, the near-Decambarids that were introduced into Europe, the Palearctic realm. They looked really carefully across that full spectrum of ecosystem services, provisioning, regulating, supporting, and even cultural services.
So like a full ecological audit.
Yeah.
And is there one particular species that exemplifies this whole issue? The paper must highlight one, right?
Absolutely. If there's a poster child for invasive crayfish, it's the red swamp crayfish, Procambarus clarkii. It's the most widely introduced species on the planet, and it really shows the mixed bag, although the bad often outweighs the good.
Okay, let's dig into the costs then. What are some concrete examples of the harm?
Let's start with the direct economic hits impacts on provisioning and regulating services. These crayfish, they're powerful ecosystem engineers. Their digging and eating habits translate directly into financial losses.
How so?
Well, in Italy, for instance, one water authority estimated an 8% loss in annual income just from P. clarkii clogging up irrigation pipes. Think about that 8%.
That's a huge chunk of an operating budget, just from crayfish traffic jams in the pipes. Astonishing. What about direct impacts on farming or fishing?
It hits there, too. In Portugal, the paper cites studies showing P. clarkii reduced the profitability of rice harvests by around 6%. And it's not just Europe. In parts of Africa, they cause problems by damaging fishing nets. The point is, the supposed economic gain from farming the crayfish often gets swallowed up by losses in other established sectors.
Okay, that's the tangible stuff. But then there's the disease angle, right? This is where the ecosystem's ability to sort of regulate itself breaks down.
This is probably the most dramatic and, frankly, devastating part of the story. It involves something called crayfish plague. It's caused by a water mold, Aphantomyces astacei.
Yeah, it came from.
It hitched a ride to Europe on North American crayfish species, starting way back in the 1860s. See, the North American species evolved with it, so they're mostly resistant. But for native European crayfish, it's incredibly lethal.
So it just decimated the native populations.
Utterly. It wiped out huge portions of the native crayfish fishery. Species like the noble crayfish, Astacus zacticus, we're talking reductions of up to 90% in commercial harvests. It basically destroyed a valuable natural resource. And we shouldn't forget, crayfish can also carry things harmful to humans, like bacteria causing tularemia or certain parasitic lung flukes.
So they're hitting native wildlife, human health, and infrastructure. You mentioned their engineering skills. What about those supporting services, the fundamental ecological structures?
Yeah, think of them as underwater earth movers. Their burrowing activity can cause really significant bank erosion and damage structures built near the water. But perhaps the biggest impact on supporting services is what they do to aquatic plants.
They eat them.
Voraciously. They can cause massive reductions. The
Yeah.
paper mentions anywhere from 50% to even 100% loss of submerged macrophytes, those underwater plants that are so crucial.
And losing those plants just unravels the whole system, doesn't it?
It really does. When you lose that underwater vegetation, the whole habitat can flip. It often shifts from clear water with lots of structure to a murky, turbid state. And that turbid state is often dominated by things like toxic cyanobacteria, blue-green algae blooms. So a decision made for aquaculture profit can lead directly to poor water quality and toxic algae.
It sounds overwhelmingly negative. But the paper did mention a strange positive effect somewhere, didn't it? Just to show the complexity.
Yes, it's important to note the nuances. There's a specific case in parts of Africa where P. clarkii actually prey on the snails that carry the parasites, causing human schistosomiasis, a really nasty disease. So in that specific context, they provide a public health benefit.
Huh. A localized win against a backdrop of broader ecological issues. It does show it's never black and white.
Exactly, but it seems to be a rare exception.
Okay, what about the cultural impact? Losing native species often means losing traditions, right?
Definitely. The paper points out the loss of heritage value. When native European crayfish populations crashed because of the plague and competition, it wasn't just an ecological loss. It meant the end of local crayfish festivals, traditional fishing methods passed down generations. It harmed the cultural identity tied to those native species.
So pulling all these different impacts together, economic, ecological, cultural, what was the overall conclusion from the researchers regarding these introductions?
The conclusion was pretty stark, actually. They found that wherever the impacts have been properly quantified, especially for P. clarkii and another invader, the signal crayfish, the total losses across various ecosystem services consistently and significantly outweigh the initial benefits from introducing them.
And that finding is what eventually led to regulations.
Yes, that documented net loss is why many regions, particularly across Europe, have had to bring in regulations trying to prohibit further introductions or spread, but often it's reactive and expensive by that point.
Which perfectly sets up the next question. If the costs are so high, how is science helping us shift from just reacting to actually preventing these problems? Yeah. Moving towards being proactive.
That's where things get more hopeful. The focus is shifting heavily towards pre-introduction risk assessment. We're getting much, much better at predicting which species might cause trouble before they even arrive.
How do you do that?
One major tool is environmental niche modeling. Scientists use data about where a species lives naturally and its environmental tolerances to predict all the other places in the world where it could potentially survive and thrive if introduced.
So you can map out the potential danger zones.
Exactly. For example, the models predict that the potential global range for peak larvae is actually way bigger than where it's currently established. That's a red flag for policymakers, showing areas still vulnerable.
That sounds powerful. What else is in the risk assessment toolkit?
Another really important approach is trait-based risk assessment. This looks at the biological characteristics of the species itself. Research on crayfish from the southeastern U.S., for instance, identified specific traits linked to high invasion risk.
Like what kind of traits?
Things like being larger in size, having higher fecundity, meaning they produce lots of offspring, or having aggressive reproductive behaviors. By analyzing these traits, scientists could predict invasiveness with, well, pretty high accuracy, up to 90% in some studies.
90% accuracy, that's impressive. That gives managers a solid basis to deny an import permit, right? Saying, look, the risk profile is just too high.
Precisely. It moves the decision away from guesswork and towards data-driven prevention.
Okay, so we can predict risk better. But what happens if an invasion starts anyway? How do we manage the spread? The paper mentioned applying ideas from disease control?
Yeah, that's a key insight. Using ecological theory, especially network models, to make management smarter and more cost-effective. Think about how diseases spread through a population. You can apply similar logic to how invasive species spread through connected waterways, like lakes linked by rivers or boater traffic.
So instead of trying to guard every single lake.
Right, which is often impossible. Network models can predict which lakes are most likely to receive introductions, maybe because they're popular boating spots connected to already infested lakes. So you focus your inspection efforts, your public awareness campaigns, on those high-risk hubs.
Makes sense. But what if it's past that point? What if lots of lakes are already infested?
Then the strategy might shift. The paper suggests that sometimes the most cost-effective thing isn't trying to stop crayfish getting into new lakes, but trying to stop them getting out of the heavily infested source lakes. Basically focusing on preventing egress, stopping the propagules, the young crayfish or eggs from spreading further, like quarantining the hotspots.
Clever resource allocation. Okay, last line of defense. Early detection and trying to control populations that are already there. Any new tools helping with that?
Yes, surveillance is getting a boost from new technology. One major advance is environmental DNA, or eDNA.
How does that work?
Crayfish, like all organisms, shed DNA into the water skin cells, mucus waste. Scientists can now collect water samples, filter them, and test for the specific DNA signature of the invasive crayfish. It's incredibly sensitive, much more so than hoping to catch one in a trap, especially when numbers are low.
So you can find them earlier when control might still be feasible. What else?
Another interesting approach uses the crayfish's own biology against them. Researchers are experimenting with using sex pheromones, the chemical signals crayfish use to find mates to bait traps.
Making the traps irresistible.
Exactly, especially for males. It makes traditional trapping methods much more efficient and targeted, helping to disrupt reproduction.
But even with better detection, getting rid of an established population eradication, that's still really hard, isn't it?
Oh, incredibly hard. The paper acknowledges that successful eradications are usually only possible in very small, isolated water bodies, often using nonspecific biocides, which can harm other wildlife too. It's a blunt tool.
So for larger areas, what's the realistic path forward?
It seems to be integrated pest management, combining different approaches, intensive trapping or harvesting, perhaps using physical barriers in some cases, and critically trying to boost populations of native predators that might eat the invasive crayfish.
Did the paper give any examples where that worked?
Yes, they mentioned a case in a Wisconsin lake. Over 5 years, they combined intensive trapping with fishing restrictions designed to help native predatory fish recover. The result was a 95% decrease in the invasive crayfish population, and the native aquatic plants actually came back.
Wow, 95% reduction in plant recovery.
Yeah.
So it is possible, just very difficult and requires sustained effort.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It shows that restoration isn't impossible, but it needs commitment and an integrated strategy.
This whole deep dive really paints a picture, doesn't it? From understanding the deep history to tracking global spread, quantifying complex impacts, and now developing these sophisticated prevention and management tools, it feels like the science allows us to make much more informed choices now.
It absolutely does. The decision about whether or not to introduce a species or how to manage one that's already here doesn't have to be based on hope or short-term thinking anymore. We have predictive science that can make management proactive, not just reactive. That's a huge step.
And there's a fascinating societal aspect revealed here too, isn't there? In the money we spend fighting these invasions.
That's a really interesting point the paper touches on. The fact that societies are spending significant amounts, they estimated around £500,000 annually just in Scotland, trying to control signal crayfish, that spending itself tells a story.
What story is that?
It suggests that, implicitly at least, there's a widespread societal recognition that the long-term costs, the ecological damage, the cultural losses, the infrastructure repairs, ultimately outweigh the initial, often short-lived economic benefits of the introduction. Our actions, our spending on control, reveal that value judgment.
That economic and cultural value difference is so important, and it brings us right back to people's preferences. The paper noted something interesting about Sweden, didn't it? Consumers paying way more for native crayfish.
Yes, apparently willingness to pay can be 10 times higher for the native noble crayfish compared to the cheaper introduced red swamp crayfish. So even with all the evidence of ecological harm from the non-natives and this clear market preference for the native species, it leads to a final thought for you, the listener.
What is it that truly drives our preferences? Is it just taste? Or is it tradition, a sense of place, something deeper that makes people value those native species so much more, even when cheaper alternatives are readily available? Something to chew on next time crayfish are on the menu. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the complex world of crayfish invasions and their asymmetric costs. We'll catch you next time.